The call came exactly 10 days into Marcus's honeymoon. His voice shaking with panic as he realized his business was destroyed, his accounts frozen, his whole world crashing down. "Mom, what the hell did you do?" he screamed. And for the first time in my life, I smiled at my son's desperation. I woke up on my son's wedding day expecting to feel joy. Instead, I felt something wrong with my pillow, something soft and strange against my cheek. When I sat up, the morning light streaming through my bedroom window revealed what looked like a small animal scattered across my white pillowcase. But it wasn't an animal. It was my hair, all of it, every single strand. I stumbled to the bathroom mirror, my heart hammering so hard I could hear it in my ears. The woman staring back at me was completely bald. Not thinning, not patchy. My scalp was as smooth as a newborn's. I ran my trembling fingers over my head, searching for even one remaining hair. Nothing, just skin that felt alien under my touch. My beautiful silver hair, the hair that had taken 2 years to grow out into the elegant style I'd planned for today, was gone, completely gone. I looked like I was undergoing chemotherapy, like I had when I watched my Robert waste away. The irony wasn't lost on me. Today was supposed to be about new beginnings, about celebrating love. And instead, I looked like death itself. Hey, beautiful soul. Before we dive in, show some love with a like, tap subscribe, and tell me, where in this big, beautiful world are you watching from? I grabbed my phone with shaking hands, ready to call Marcus and tell him we needed to rush to the emergency room. This had to be some kind of medical emergency. Hair doesn't just fall out overnight like this. Maybe it was stress. Maybe it was some kind of autoimmune condition. Maybe I was sicker than I knew. But before I could dial, I heard Marcus's key in my front door. He always came by on important days to check on me, a habit that had made me feel so loved and cared for. Today, I was desperate for his comfort, his concern, his help in figuring out what was wrong with me. "Mom, you ready for the big day?" he called out cheerfully. "Marcus, thank God you're here," I called back, my voice cracking. "Something terrible has happened. I need to get to a hospital right away." He appeared in my bedroom doorway, and I braced myself for his shock, his immediate concern, his rush to help me. Instead, he looked at my bald head and smiled. Not a worried smile, not a reassuring smile, a satisfied smile. "Good," he said, as casually as if he were commenting on the weather. "Sophia will be so relieved. She specifically asked for this as her only wedding gift. That you wouldn't upstage her today." The words hit me like a physical blow. I actually stepped backward, my hand reaching for the dresser to steady myself. "What did you just say?" "She was really worried about the photos, Mom. You know how you always look so put together. And she's been stressed about having to compete with that. This solves everything." I stared at my son, this man I had raised, loved, and sacrificed for, and realized with crystal clarity that he had known this would happen. He had known I would wake up bald and humiliated on his wedding day, and he was happy about it. The room started to spin as one horrible thought crystallized in my mind. If Marcus knew this would happen, then someone had made it happen. And my own son had let them, standing there in my bedroom, bald and betrayed. My mind drifted back to a different morning 35 years ago. I was holding 3-year-old Marcus in my arms, both of us crying in an empty apartment after his father walked out. I remember whispering into his soft baby hair, "It's just you and me now, sweetheart. Mama's going to take care of everything." And I did. For 8 years, it was just Marcus and me against the world. I worked the early shift at the diner, the afternoon shift at the department store, and cleaned offices at night while he slept. I survived on 4 hours of sleep and gas station coffee. But I never missed a single soccer game, never forgot a school project, never let him feel like he was missing anything, because his father was gone. When I met Robert at the grocery store, when Marcus was 8, I was so tired, I could barely stand. Robert saw me counting coupons with shaking hands, saw Marcus tugging at my uniform, asking for cereal we couldn't afford. Instead of judging me, he quietly paid for our groceries and asked if he could take us both to dinner. That night, Marcus fell asleep in the restaurant booth, And Robert carried him to the car, like he was his own son. Robert became the father Marcus never had. He taught him to drive, helped him with homework, and cheered louder than anyone at his high school graduation. When Marcus got into architecture school, Robert worked overtime for 2 years to help pay the tuition. "That boy's going to build something beautiful in this world," Robert would say, beaming with pride. After Robert died 2 years ago, I felt lost for the first time since Marcus was born. The house felt too big, too quiet, too full of memories. When Marcus suggested I sell it and move closer to him, I jumped at the chance. I used the money from the sale to help him start his architecture firm, telling myself it was what Robert would have wanted. I became Marcus's unofficial assistant, managing his books, bringing him lunch during those long work days when he was establishing his business. I watched him grow from that scared little boy I'd held in the empty apartment to a successful, confident man. When he introduced me to Sophia 3 years ago, I saw how his eyes lit up when he talked about her. I hosted their engagement party in my new apartment, making sure everything was perfect because I wanted his happiness more than anything. Marcus was my masterpiece. Every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every dollar I scraped together had been worth it to see him become the man he was. When people asked me what I was proudest of in my life, I always said the same thing. My son. I raised a good man. Robert used to tease me about spoiling Marcus. "Ava, honey, you can't fix every problem for him," he'd say gently. Sometimes people need to learn things the hard way. But I'd always defend Marcus, always find a reason why he needed just a little more help, a little more support. Now, standing in my bedroom, completely bald and humiliated, I realized that Robert had been right. I hadn't raised a good man. I'd raised a man who would allow his own mother to be chemically assaulted for his bride's comfort. I'd raised a man who could look at my devastation and call it good. Looking back now, I can see the signs were all there. I just chose to ignore them because I wanted so desperately to believe that Marcus was still the loving son I'd raised, and that Sophia would become the daughter I'd never had. It started about 6 months ago, right after they announced their engagement. Sophia began making little comments during our family dinners. When we'd pass elderly women on the street, she'd whisper things like, "Look at her trying to dress like she's 25," or "Some women just don't know when to age gracefully." At first, I thought she was just being catty about strangers. I never imagined she was studying me, cataloging everything she found threatening about my appearance. The comments got more direct as the wedding approached. She'd suggest I might want to consider toning down my makeup for the ceremony, or mention how some mothers of the groom try too hard to be the center of attention. When I wore a new dress to their engagement photos, she smiled sweetly and said, "Oh, Ava, you look so young for your age. Some people might think you're trying to compete with the bride." Marcus, who used to defend me against even the mildest criticism, would just laugh these comments off. "Sophia's just nervous about the wedding," he'd say. "You know how brides get." But I noticed he stopped asking me to help with the wedding planning after that. Suddenly my opinions weren't needed anymore. The shift in our relationship was subtle, but unmistakable. Marcus stopped dropping by as often, stopped asking for my help with his business, stopped sharing the little details of his daily life that had always made me feel included. When I'd call, he'd be polite but distant, always having somewhere else to be. The warmth that had always existed between us began to feel forced, like he was performing the role of loving son, rather than actually being one. 3 weeks before the wedding, Sophia brought up my hair directly. We were looking at the wedding venue when she mentioned that the photographer specialized in timeless, classic portraits, and suggested I might want to consider a more age-appropriate hairstyle. She showed me pictures of other mothers of the groom with short, conservative cuts, nothing like my shoulder-length silver waves that I'd grown out specially for the occasion. "I just think," she said, linking her arm through Marcus's, "that the photos will look more cohesive if everyone has a similar level of sophistication." The way she said it made it clear that my current look didn't meet her standards. I laughed it off, telling her I loved my hair and thought it looked elegant. But I noticed how Marcus didn't come to my defense. He just nodded along, studying the photos Sophia had chosen, like they were blueprints for a building he was designing. The final warning sign came 2 weeks before the wedding. Sophia insisted on treating me to a spa day at an expensive salon across town. She called it her special gift for the mother of the groom, and made such a big production of it that I felt ungrateful for having any reservations. The stylist, a young woman named Crystal, spent an unusually long time washing my hair. She used a special treatment that she said would give me incredible shine and body for the wedding photos. The formula tingled strangely on my scalp, almost burning, but Crystal assured me that was normal for such a high-quality treatment. Sophia sat in the chair next to me, getting a simple manicure, watching everything with keen interest. She kept asking Crystal questions about the hair treatment, taking notes on her phone for future reference. At the time, I thought she was just being thoughtful, maybe planning to book the same treatment for herself. I should have known something was wrong when Crystal refused to let me see the product bottles, claiming it was proprietary formula. I should have questioned why Sophia was so insistent on this particular salon, this particular stylist, this particular treatment. But I was so touched by what seemed like a generous gesture that I ignored every red flag. Now I understand that spa day wasn't a gift at all. It was a setup, and my own son had helped orchestrate it. "You knew," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "You knew this would happen to me." Marcus shifted uncomfortably in my bedroom doorway, but his expression remained infuriatingly calm. "Mom, don't be so dramatic. It's not permanent." Dramatic. I turned toward him, and he actually took a step back. Maybe it was the sight of my bald head, or maybe it was something in my eyes he'd never seen before. "My hair is gone, Marcus. All of it. I look like I'm dying." "It'll grow back," he said, shrugging like we were discussing a minor inconvenience. Sophia researched it thoroughly. The treatment Crystal used is completely safe. It's actually used in Hollywood when actors need to go bald for roles. The casual way he said it made my blood run cold. Sophia researched it? What exactly did she research? Marcus sat down on my bed, looking almost proud of himself. "It's this amazing, colorless, odorless compound that causes temporary but complete hair loss. You mix it into regular shampoo, and within 14 days, all the hair falls out." Sophia found it online through some special effects forum. I stared at him, struggling to process what I was hearing. "You're telling me that you and Sophia plan to chemically assault me? God, Mom, you're being so overdramatic. It's just hair." He ran his hand through his own thick brown hair as he said it. "Look, Sophia has been really stressed about the wedding photos. She's worked so hard to look perfect, and she was worried that you'd overshadow her. You know how good you always look in pictures. So, you decided to make me bald?" "We decided to level the playing field," Marcus said, as if this were a perfectly reasonable solution. "Sophia said it would be the only wedding gift she'd ever ask for. She was crying about it, Mom. She said she'd always dreamed of being the most beautiful woman in her wedding photos. And she was terrified that wouldn't happen with you there, looking so elegant." I felt like I was having an out-of-body experience. This couldn't be my son talking. This couldn't be the man I'd raised, speaking so casually about orchestrating my humiliation. "And you thought this was acceptable? Happy wife, happy life, right?" Marcus stood up, smoothing down his shirt. "Besides, you won't even be in most of the photos anyway. We've decided to keep the ceremony really small and intimate." The words hit me like a physical blow. "What do you mean I won't be in the photos?" Marcus looked genuinely surprised by my reaction. "Well, we can't have you in the formal portraits looking like that. It would ruin the whole aesthetic we're going for." But he wasn't finished destroying me. "Actually, Mom, we need to talk about something else. Sophia and I decided last night that we're going to elope to Hawaii instead. The big wedding felt too stressful, and with everything that's happened, we think it's better this way." I felt the room tilt. "What about the wedding I helped pay for? The $50,000? "Oh, we're keeping that for our honeymoon, and to get started in married life," Marcus said, as if this were obvious. "We figured you'd want us to have a good start, and Hawaii is expensive. Plus, This way, there's no pressure on you to figure out what to do about your hair situation. Standing there in my bedroom, completely bald and financially betrayed, I realized that my son hadn't just allowed me to be chemically assaulted. He had stolen my money, excluded me from his wedding, and spoke about it all like he was doing me a favor. After Marcus left, cheerfully reminding me that he and Sophia would be in touch from Hawaii, I stood frozen in my bedroom for what felt like hours. The silence in my apartment was deafening. No footsteps in the hallway, no wedding preparations, no excited phone calls from relatives asking about the ceremony. Just me, bald and alone, in a space that suddenly felt like a tomb. I caught sight of myself in the full-length mirror and actually gasped. The woman staring back at me looked like a stranger, not just because of the missing hair, but because of the expression on her face. I looked hollow, defeated, like someone who had been systematically dismantled piece by piece. This wasn't the confident woman who had raised a child alone, who had built a life with Robert, who had helped launch her son's business. This was a victim. I walked to Robert's old armchair in the living room and sank into it, pulling his worn cardigan around my shoulders. The fabric still smelled faintly of his cologne, and for a moment, I let myself imagine he was there with me. What would he say if he could see me now? What would he think of the man we'd raised together? That's when I saw it. On the side table next to the chair, tucked between some bills and a magazine, was our wedding photo. Robert and I, young and radiant, standing in front of the little church where we'd promised to love and honor each other. I was wearing my grandmother's pearl necklace and a simple white dress that made me feel like a princess. Robert was looking at me in the photo, like I was the most beautiful woman he'd ever seen. I picked up the frame with trembling hands, running my finger over the glass. I remembered that day so clearly. How Robert had whispered in my ear during our first dance, "You're glowing, Ava. You're absolutely glowing." I remembered feeling so loved, so valued, so worthy of celebration. The contrast with today was devastating. But as I sat there, something started to shift inside me. A memory surfaced from about 5 years ago, when Marcus had convinced me to co-sign a loan for his business expansion. Robert had been alive then, and he'd pulled me aside after Marcus left our house that night. "Ava, honey," he'd said gently, "I love that boy like he's my own, but you're teaching him that he can take without giving. That's not love, that's enabling." I'd been so angry with Robert that night. How dare he suggest that helping our son was anything but love? I'd accused him of being jealous, of not understanding the bond between a mother and child. Robert had just shaken his head sadly and said, "I'm not worried about Marcus, sweetheart. I'm worried about you. What happens when you've given him everything and he still wants more?" Now, sitting in Robert's chair, I understood what he'd been trying to tell me. Marcus didn't love me. He loved what I could do for him, what I could give him, how I could solve his problems. The moment I stopped being useful, the moment I became an inconvenience, he had no problem destroying me. I thought about all the times over the years when Marcus had disappointed me in small ways. The birthday he forgot, the promises he didn't keep, the times he'd chosen his own comfort over my feelings. I'd made excuses for every single one, telling myself that boys were just different, that he was busy, that he loved me even if he didn't always show it perfectly. But this wasn't imperfect love. This was calculated cruelty. I sat in that chair for hours, not crying, not raging, just thinking. The sun moved across the sky, casting different shadows through my living room windows, and slowly, something hard and cold settled in my chest. Not anger, exactly, but something deeper. A clarity I hadn't felt in years. For the first time in my adult life, I stopped making excuses for Marcus. I stopped trying to find ways to justify his behavior or blame myself for his choices. I saw him clearly for what he was, a man who would poison his own mother for his wife's vanity, steal her money, and exclude her from his life without a second thought. I wasn't Robert's beloved wife anymore. I wasn't the devoted mother who had sacrificed everything for her son. I was a 72-year-old woman who had been chemically assaulted and financially betrayed by the person she loved most in the world. But I was still here, and I was done being a victim. The next morning, I woke up with a strange sense of calm. Not peace, exactly, but the kind of focused clarity that comes when you finally stop fighting reality and start working with it. I made my coffee, wrapped one of my silk scarves around my bald head, and sat down at my kitchen table with my laptop and a legal pad. If Marcus thought I was just a helpless old woman who would quietly nurse her wounds while he enjoyed his stolen honeymoon, he was about to learn otherwise. My first call was to James Morrison, the attorney who had handled Robert's estate. James had been Robert's friend for 30 years, and he'd always told me to call if I ever needed anything. Well, today I needed something. "Ava, how are you holding up?" James asked when his secretary put me through. "I heard about the wedding today. How exciting." "Actually, James, that's why I'm calling. I need to review the terms of the business loan I co-signed for Marcus's firm." There was a pause. "Is everything all right?" "Let's just say I'm concerned about the security of my investment." James pulled up the paperwork while I waited, and within minutes, he confirmed what I'd hoped. As co-signer, I had the legal right to call in the loan immediately if I had reasonable concerns about the borrower's ability to repay, or if I felt the investment was at risk. Marcus's business was entirely dependent on that loan. Without it, he couldn't cover his current project costs, his office lease, or his employees' salaries. "I'll start the paperwork today," James said. "The loan will be called in full within 72 hours. My second call was to the wedding venue. Since I had put down the deposit and signed the contract in my name to help Marcus establish credit, canceling was straightforward. The coordinator was sympathetic when I explained that the couple had decided to elope, and she agreed to refund everything except a small cancellation fee. Then I called the caterer, the florist, and the photographer. All contracts in my name, all cancelable with minimal fees, since I was giving more than 48 hours notice. Marcus had been so eager to let me handle the boring details of wedding planning that he'd never bothered to put anything in his own name. My third call was to the bank. The joint account I'd opened to help Marcus manage his business expenses had my name as the primary holder. I transferred every penny to my personal savings account and closed it immediately. But I wasn't finished. I drove to Marcus's office, using my key to let myself in. On his desk was a velvet jewelry box containing my grandmother's pearl necklace, the one I'd lent Sophia for the wedding. Next to it were my grandmother's diamond earrings and my mother's gold bracelet, family heirlooms that Sophia had been so excited to borrow for her something old. I put every piece of jewelry into my purse. They were mine, after all. While I was there, I also retrieved the spare laptop I'd bought for the business, the one I'd been using to manage Marcus's books. It contained years of financial records that I'd meticulously maintained, records that would be very useful if Marcus tried to claim I'd stolen anything. My final stop was the travel agency. I'd been putting off the European cruise that Robert and I had planned before he got sick. We'd dreamed of seeing the Mediterranean together, visiting the little coastal towns he'd read about in his history books. The travel agent was delighted to help me book a month-long cruise, departing in 2 weeks. After that, I called my sister Claire in San Diego. "How would you feel about having a roommate for a while?" I asked. "Ava, what's wrong? You sound different." "Everything's wrong, Claire. But I'm finally doing something about it." By evening, I had accomplished something remarkable. I had quietly, legally, and completely dismantled Marcus's financial security without him having any idea what was happening. He was somewhere over the Pacific Ocean, probably toasting his clever manipulation of his foolish mother, while his entire life was crumbling back home. The best part was that he wouldn't find out until it was far too late to do anything about it. Marcus and Sophia's Hawaiian honeymoon lasted exactly 10 days. 10 blissful days where they posted sunset photos and romantic dinner pictures on social media, while I quietly packed my belongings and arranged my new life. 10 days where Marcus probably felt smugly satisfied about how cleverly he'd handled his troublesome mother. The call came on a Tuesday morning while I was sipping coffee on my sister Claire's balcony overlooking San Diego Bay. My hair had started growing back in soft silver fuzz, and I was wearing a gorgeous silk head wrap that Claire had bought me, feeling more like myself than I had in months. "Mom, what the hell did you do?" Marcus's voice was shaking with rage and panic. Good morning, Marcus. How was Hawaii? Don't play games with me. My business account is frozen. The bank says you called in the loan. My office lease is in default. Janet, my assistant, called crying because her paycheck bounced. I took another sip of my coffee, watching a pelican dive into the sparkling water below. That's unfortunate. Unfortunate? Mom, you're destroying my life. I have 3 major projects in progress. I have clients depending on me. I could lose everything. Interesting choice of words, I said calmly. When you made me bald and stole $50,000 from me, did you consider that you might be destroying my life? That's completely different, and you know it. This is business. This affects other people, not just me. The audacity took my breath away. Even facing financial ruin, Marcus was more concerned about his reputation than the fact that he'd chemically assaulted his own mother. You're right, Marcus. It does affect other people. Like the wedding vendors who didn't get paid because you canceled the wedding after I'd already put down deposits. Like your assistant Janet, who's been working for a company funded by money you stole from me. I didn't steal anything. That money was a gift. Was it? Because I don't remember giving you permission to elope and keep the wedding funds. I remember you announcing it like I should be grateful for the privilege of being excluded and robbed. There was a long pause. When Marcus spoke again, his voice had shifted from anger to desperation. Mom, please. I know we made some mistakes, but you can't just destroy everything I've worked for. Think about what Robert would say. The mention of Robert's name was the final straw. Robert would say that a man who poisons his own mother and steals her money doesn't deserve to prosper from his crimes. Robert would say that actions have consequences, something I apparently failed to teach you. Mom, I'm begging you. Sophia and I, we're sorry. We didn't think it through. Your hair looks fine with the scarf, honestly. And we can pay you back the wedding money over time. My hair looks fine? I actually laughed. Marcus, do you hear yourself? You chemically burned off all my hair, and you think an apology and a payment plan fixes that? What do you want from me? You want me to grovel? Fine, I'm groveling. Please don't ruin my business over this. I'm not ruining your business, Marcus. I'm simply removing my financial support from someone who has proven he can't be trusted. You're 35 years old. Figure it out. Where are you even calling from? I went to your apartment, and some stranger answered the door. The building manager said you moved out. I'm starting a new life, Marcus, away from people who think love means accepting abuse. That's when I heard Sophia's voice in the background, shrill and demanding. Tell her she can't do this to us. Tell her we'll sue her. Marcus covered the phone, but I could still hear them arguing. When he came back, his voice was cold, in a way I'd never heard before. Sophia's right. You can't just steal our money and disappear. We have lawyers too. Our money? I stood up from the balcony chair, my voice sharpening. Marcus, I co-signed a loan that I had every legal right to call in. I canceled wedding contracts that were in my name and took back my own family jewelry. What exactly do you think you could sue me for? The silence on the other end told me everything I needed to know. Marcus had never bothered to read the contracts or understand the legal implications of letting me handle everything. He'd been so focused on taking advantage of my generosity that he'd never considered it might give me power over him. Mom, he said finally, his voice small. I need you. I can't do this without you. For a moment, just a moment, I felt the old tug of maternal instinct. This was my baby, my little boy, who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. But then I remembered the satisfied smile on his face when he saw me bald and broken, and the feeling passed. You should have thought of that before you decided I was dispensable, I said quietly. Goodbye, Marcus. I hung up the phone and turned off my old number. Whatever came next, it would be on my terms. 6 months later, I'm sitting on the balcony of my oceanfront apartment in La Jolla, watching the sunset paint the Pacific in shades of gold and coral. My hair has grown back completely. Thick and lustrous silver waves that catch the light beautifully. Claire says I look 10 years younger than I did before the wedding that never happened. I think she's right. The apartment is small, but perfect, with floor-to-ceiling windows that let in the morning light and a view that never gets old. I furnished it entirely, with pieces I chose, colors I love, art that speaks to me. For the first time in my adult life, every decision was mine alone. It's remarkably liberating. My days are full in ways they never were when I was managing Marcus's life. I joined a book club that meets at the local library, where we debate everything from poetry to politics with the kind of passion I'd forgotten I possessed. On Tuesdays, I take a watercolor painting class at the community center, finally pursuing the artistic dreams I'd put aside to raise a child and support a husband. My paintings aren't masterpieces, but they're mine. And there's something deeply satisfying about creating something beautiful with my own hands. I've made friends here, real friends who know me as Ava, the painter, Ava the book lover, Ava the woman who tells fascinating stories about her European cruise. Not Ava, the devoted mother, not Ava, the helpful widow, just Ava. The cruise was everything Robert and I had dreamed it would be. I scattered some of his ashes in the Mediterranean, just as we'd planned, and I finally understood what he'd been trying to tell me all those years. Love isn't about sacrificing yourself until there's nothing left. Love is about seeing someone clearly and choosing to honor who they really are. This morning, I found a letter in my mailbox. Marcus's handwriting, my old address, crossed out and forwarded by the post office. I almost threw it away without reading it, but curiosity got the better of me. It was 3 pages long, full of apologies and explanations. He'd lost his business, just as I knew he would. Sophia had left him when the money ran out, taking half of what little remained. He was living in a studio apartment, working for someone else's firm, learning what it meant to start over with nothing. The letter was everything I might have wanted to hear 6 months ago. He acknowledged that what they'd done was wrong, that he'd been ungrateful and cruel, that he understood now how much I'd sacrificed for him over the years. He begged for forgiveness, for a chance to rebuild our relationship, for the opportunity to prove he'd learned from his mistakes. I read the letter twice, sitting in my favorite chair with my morning coffee, waiting to feel something. Anger, sadness, the old maternal tug that used to make me rush to fix his problems. But all I felt was a distant kind of peace. I walked to my kitchen, took out a lighter, and watched the letter burn in the sink. Not from anger, but from clarity. That chapter of my life was closed, and I had no interest in reopening it. Later, I pulled out my journal, the one I'd started keeping after the wedding day. On today's page, I wrote, I spent 35 years teaching my son that love means accepting any treatment. It took losing my hair to find my backbone. Sometimes the most powerful response to betrayal isn't revenge. It's simply refusing to be diminished by someone else's cruelty. Today, I choose peace. Today, I choose me. I set down my pen and looked out at the ocean, where pelicans were diving for fish in the evening light. Tomorrow, I'm starting a photography class. Next week, Claire and I are planning a trip to see the wildflowers in the desert. My life is my own now, and it's beautiful.